1 Corinthians chapter 1. We're going to start in verse 17. I've been really looking forward to this message. I think it's going to be really encouraging as far as how we share the gospel, and I think it's also going to be maybe take a little bit of weight off, but also spur us all the more. So I'm looking forward to this. Let's go ahead and start reading 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 17. We're going to read all the way down through chapter 2, verse 5. So we're going to read a fair bit here. For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, and not with words of eloquent wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that, as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. And I, when I came to you, brothers, did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling. And my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of God, but in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. All right. Okay, let's start back in verse 17. We'll walk through this. I'm pretty excited. So, first of all, Paul's talking about just his ministry as a whole here when he says, Christ didn't send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel. In fact, if you go just a few verses back, you'll see he wasn't opposed to baptism. He was for it, just he wasn't the guy doing most of the baptism. He was the one preaching about faith in Christ and being saved and encouraging baptism, but just he wasn't the one doing a lot of baptism. The reason he mentions this is there was people saying, oh, I'm following Paul or Cephas or Apollos or whoever, and just the baptism thing became confusing for some people, thinking they were being baptized to follow Paul, when really it was about following Christ. So just wanted to get that little piece out of the way. Paul's not opposed to baptism. But he says his focus here is preaching the gospel. And I want to just, this is going to be probably about my thesis statement, but you'll see we're going to dive in a little bit deeper. He says he's preaching the gospel not with words of eloquent wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. And so if there's one thing that you get from this whole message, I want you to understand that the preaching of the gospel isn't about having the right words to say, sounding really pretty and flowery as you say it, having the right way to go about it or whatever, but it's really just about getting the message out in its simplicity. I think sometimes we try so hard to have the right method and all the right answers that really it becomes about how well we can do and not about the message that saves. And so that's probably my thesis statement right there. We're going to talk about how it's the gospel in its simplicity that saves, and not our ability to explain or our methods or what. So let's continue on. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved is the power of God. I want you to see that the message of the gospel, the message about Jesus on its own, it is foolish. And in fact, down in really it's several verses, but I want you to see that it's foolishness on its own. God did this on purpose. It says, to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. To those who are perishing, it's foolishness. For it's written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. God's doing this on purpose. This isn't an accident that the gospel sounds foolish. It's not appealing. It says, where is the one who's wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? This is God's design, that the gospel would seem foolish on its own. So this is really what he gets into in like verse 23. He says, we preach Christ crucified. I just want to get into this message for a second so you'll get what he means when he says it sounds foolish. So, and this resonates here in America too. So what we're saying when we preach the gospel is we're saying, hey, you have been evil. There's really a God out there. You deny his existence, or you live as if there isn't one, but there's really a God who made everything, and he made you for him. And you and your evil and your wickedness have disobeyed and disregarded him. That's really palatable, isn't it? That's really like, yeah, brother, preach that. If you're not in Christ, you don't want to hear that. It's foolishness. First of all, because people on their own naturally either deny God with their actions or naturally deny him vocally. They would say, yeah, there's no God. That's just naturally what we do. You can read Romans 1 and you'll see that. We take what's obvious, that there is a God, and on our own we naturally discount that. We push it aside. We replace God with ourselves. We replace God with other things. And so naturally, even the message, there is really a God, and not just like some philosophical concept of God, but there's really a God who made us for him. That on its own is offensive. You can't fix that. But we go beyond that and say, and he made you for him, and you have rebelled and denied him and disregarded him. And that's offensive. And then we say, and so he's filled with wrath about this. Like he's not happy about the fact that we rebelled. And that's offensive. And we say, but God is gracious and merciful. You can't fix this. And that's offensive. You can't fix this, but he's gracious and merciful, gave his son in your place. Jesus died and took all of your punishment. And that's offensive. The one who would save you has died and has come back to life. Is offensive, and it sounds foolish. Okay, so listen, God could have designed something that wouldn't sound foolish and crazy and whatever, but he didn't. And sometimes we think that it's our job to change that, to try and make the gospel message sound appealing and sound not foolish and sound whatever. But Paul says, listen, I didn't come to preach with eloquent wisdom, otherwise the cross of Christ would be emptied of its power. And he says, God designed it this way. It's written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where's the wise guy? Where's your scribe, your scholar? Where's your debaters? God has made foolish the wisdom of the world. For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. God has taken a foolish message, and he's done this on purpose, because otherwise we think, I've preached it well enough that they believed, or I've come to, it says the world didn't know God through wisdom. I came up with it in my own head. I figured it out, and that's why I know God, because I figured it out on my own. And that's what we do. If God hadn't made it seem so offensive and foolish, we would think we're just all that. We'd be filled with pride. But God has destroyed our pride with this message. He says, you can't figure this out on your own and make it figure me out. please God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. Isn't it? It's just crazy that God would use men, sinful men, sinful women, sinful people, to preach this crazy message about, that the world just naturally rejects, and that's how God's going to save people. It just floors you. But he has a reason in doing this. He has a reason in doing this. I think I want to hit this just a little more, and then we'll see really clearly why. Verse 22, for Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom. In America, it sounds more like we demand either scientific proof or some, a good feeling about it, or it's got to be entertaining, and then I fill in the blank. But that's in America. It's maybe not a sign or wisdom, but we want proofs and feelings and entertainment. I don't know. It's different, but it's still very much the same. God didn't give us that. He gave us a message. We preach Christ crucified, which is a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. Back in verse 18, he said, it's folly to those who are perishing. On our own, this message comes to us, and it is foolish, and it just doesn't make sense. But God does something with this message, and he saves some. And to those who believe, it's not foolish. It's the wisdom and the power of God. God takes this message and he uses this foolish message to save. And we can't take credit because we can't make the message not foolish. Okay? We can't try and make it not foolish. God takes the foolish message and the weak vessel that it comes through, us who proclaim it, and he uses that to save. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. God's giving himself a handicap here, and yet he's still able to save, because his weakness and his foolishness is better than our strongest and our wisest. In verse 26, he kind of demonstrates that this is true. And I think probably most of you will resonate with this. For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. I want you to think about your own time where you heard the gospel and you believed. Was it really because of the eloquence of the preacher? Was it really because they had all the answers? Was it really because of how well they delivered the truth to you? I mean, I can tell you for me, it's just not how it was, And I'm a very scientific kind of guy. I'm a reason through things and think, give me the evidence and all this. And I can think back. I was 15 when I first really heard the gospel message, and I remember looking into these things and saying, okay, well, what about this science and this and all those different specifics. And for me, that was important to go through and look through those. But I remember at the outset of starting to ask those questions, I'd already heard the gospel message. And I approached those questions from well, how is it that this is plausible? How is, because there's two ways to approach a question like, well, scientists say there is no God and that the universe came into being on its own, whereas the Bible said, there's two ways to approach that question. You can approach that going, well, how can I prove that there can't be a God? Or you can approach it as, is this plausible? Could there be a God? There's two different mindsets. And I can remember after I heard the gospel message going, well, these are important questions and I want to ask these. But I also remember going, the way I went about it wasn't in opposition to the message. even in my own scientific pursuit, I'm going, I've heard this and this is real, but how do I resolve these questions? Not how can I disprove the message? Even in our wise pursuits, that's not how God does it. He saves through the message, and I imagine you can probably think back to when you first heard and believed, and even if you had questions that you had to go answer, and it wasn't the answers to the questions, and it wasn't. I'm willing to bet that it was hearing the message in the way that you begin to think about that, the way that you begin to realize Jesus' death for you, because it's not about the wisdom and the eloquence of the delivery. It's about the message and what God does with it. Verse 27, but God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are. Why did he do it this way? So that no human being might boast in the presence of God. God did it this way on purpose because we're so good at taking credit for things. We're so good at, and whether it's on the delivery or the receiving end, we're good at taking credit for things. Oh yeah, I believe because I thought through the evidence enough. No, you didn't. You believed because God worked in your heart through the message of the gospel. This person believed because I was faithful to preach to them and I delivered it so well and I answered all their questions. No, they believed because God used the message and saved them. He transformed that. This message that's foolish, he took the weak things and he used them to save this person. So we're so good at taking credit on either side. So God said, no, here you go. It's like if someone was to give you like a toy hammer and ask you to build a house, and you just couldn't, right? But you figure out a way. Somebody asked me to do that. If I was sitting in your seat, I'd go, how did I do that? I wonder if I could, tape a rock to it, or because I'm good at taking credit for things. But no, so he didn't let us do that. He gave us a foolish message so that he might get all the honor and glory. Because of him, you're in Christ. He became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that, as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. And that's genuine faith to say, I couldn't have saved myself. I couldn't have figured this out by myself, but that God has brought this message to me. He's used it to transform me and save me. So God's removed all of our boasting. Now I want to show you, this is just chapter 2, verses 1 through 5, what Paul's model was for his method of getting the gospel out. He says, when I came to you, brothers, this was in Corinth. When I came to Corinth, I didn't come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom. I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling. In my speech and my message were not implausible words of wisdom, but a demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Paul's method of getting the gospel to the Corinthians wasn't complex. He went to Corinth and he was always talking about Jesus and him crucified. It wasn't complicated. In fact, he says, in weakness and in fear and much trembling. I may have this wrong, but I know that in one of Paul's letters he talks about how when he goes to this one church that they're surprised because his presence isn't like his letters. His letters are strong, but his presence is weak. He's not eloquent. He's not a great speaker. And yet, you look at how God used him. You can think of Moses. Moses was used mightily of God, and that was great. But I'm pretty sure Moses had a stutter. Like, he says, I can't speak well, Lord. Give me Aaron. And so he gives Aaron. The people that God used weren't great speakers. They weren't. They just were about Jesus and talked about him a lot. And so, if this is the way God saves, if it's just people being faithful to talk about Jesus, not people who have it all together, or people who have got the 10-step plan and the charts and the back. It's not. It's just, hey, are you willing to start a conversation about Jesus? And you can expect that a lot of the time they're not going to be interested because it's foolish. But you can also expect that God is able to save, and so when He so chooses, that foolish message will be powerful, and He will save through it. So if all that's true, we've just got a few maybe application ideas here. If that's true, then in our evangelism, in our telling people about Jesus, we need to be a lot less worried about having things together, figuring out, okay, when exactly is the time, and how exactly do I bring this up, and we're more worried just about telling people about it. It may be awkward. It probably will be. I can almost guarantee you it will be, because this is a foolish message. I'd like to talk to you about Jesus. There's really no comfortable way to bring this up and really get to the heart of it. I mean, there's ways to kind of skirt around it and stuff, but at some point you have to. So what do you think about Jesus? Have you heard about Jesus? You know the gospel? Have you heard about what Jesus did for us? And you have to get there, and it's going to be uncomfortable and awkward, but that's where Jesus moves and saves. Talk about that. And the second piece that I want to bring up, and I think this is especially pertinent in our current political climate, because there's so many big things being thrown around. We need to talk about this and what about that, and on and on. And I think this means we need to concern ourselves less with some of these side issues with non-Christians and more with clearly explaining the gospel. I was talking with Andrew about this on Wednesday, and I don't want to be known as the guy who's opposed to this or for that or whatever, because what happens is then I'm known as the guy with this stance on this issue. I just, that's fine. At some point, sure, it's fine to have those conversations, but they need to know Jesus. They don't need to know why this issue or that issue and things. They need to know Jesus. And so I think we need to concern ourselves less with these other issues and more just with, do you know Jesus? Because that's where transformation is going to start, is with this gospel conversation. You just need people to hear it. And third, we need to be less worried about making God look bad by our poor delivery. I worry about that. You can't. If He was worried about that, He wouldn't have given you a foolish message. He is able to take your foolish, poor explanation of the gospel and use that and get glory out of you through that. So we need to be less worried about that, I think. So the thing that makes me think, just as far as as a body, and we're already doing this, I think, in a lot of ways, but just as a body, how can we get the message out to more people? And I think, sure, talking about methods isn't a bad thing. I think, sure, there's a lot of conversations that we have that are very good and right about how can we do better at what we're doing, but I think really at the end of the day is how can we get this message to more people? Because if it's really the message that God uses to save, then that's what we need. We need to get the message to more people. And then there's conversations about discipleship and how we bring it in and all these things. So I don't want to minimize those, but just I think that's especially important. We just need to get the message to more people. So through the simple message about Jesus, that people are saved. So let's get it to people. Let's not be fearful. What do you guys think about that? How does that affect the way you are thinking or impact you? What difference do you think that makes?
I like that how you bring up the idea, the fact that it's not our job to try to make it sound wise. Because that's where society will scoff at us. That's where we want to look wise in other people's eyes. And that's why we don't talk about Jesus as much. But we've been crucified. The moon procession, which is a good visualization. But if a person can remember that, just when right before you start talking to your coworker about Jesus, hey, this is a foolish message to the world, to Satan's world. So here it is. May the Holy Spirit use.
Yeah, I know. I'm always really fearful of coming across as either offensive or just sounding dumb, and you know what, it's going to happen. That's okay, Not that I want to be offensive on my own, but the message is, and God uses that. That's how He's designed it to be.
I think with the foolish, offensive message that we have, it's important to, at least in my mind, to do evangelism for God and not to save people. Because that's the closest thing to the right thought, but still a wrong thought that I know of, that I have. We should evangelize because we care about people and want to save them, but if our object is, but if my object is to save people from hell, and the ultimate goal, then I worry about anything else. I start thinking things like, it was really uncomfortable last time I talked to him. I think I'm just going to let it slide this time because he got really awkward and it's not nice to him to make him feel that uncomfortable again. So, it's important to me that I'm not spreading the gospel with these downloaders to have the story told. And if they don't hear it and love it, then I still do my job because my job is
He's still leading you in procession. He's still making himself known through you.
So it's hard to keep in mind for that.
No, that's really right. We love people and love them to be saved, but ultimately we want to honor and obey God. We want Him to be known. I think that helps us keep the right mentality of He's the one doing this, and He's the one that this is for. And I don't want to minimize the fact that we're gracious and gentle in our delivery. That's not usually what trips me up. It's usually my fear or my feeling like I'm inadequate or not prepared or more worried about myself.
I think I beat myself up a lot. Like, I'll try to explain something to somebody, and then I'm like reviewing how it went in my head, and I'm like, such an idiot. I'm so sorry, God. And then I just like beat myself up really bad because I probably did sound dumb or something. But that kind of just gives me more peace about, I don't know, being able to do it and just knowing that it is going to sound dumb to some people and that is the way it's supposed to be. So if that happens, that's normal.
Yeah. I think when we deliver the message and we sound dumb, God's going, good job, that's awesome. You did well, you proclaimed. And He'll do what He wants to do with it. So, like I said, our sermon or our little message before we sang, He's the one leading us. He is going to get glory through us. I think we can be a little less afraid about that too. I'm thinking if we'll see. I still need to talk to Jim about this, but I was thinking about doing a follow-up message about this, about how it is God that's doing the work in the message. Like this was primarily focused about how it's the message that we need to get out. But I'm thinking about following this up, looking a little more clearly at the fact that it's God doing the work and saving. So we may do that. I still like that. I still need to talk to Jim about that. So, any other final thoughts? Or we got 3 thoughts. Okay, let me pray for us. Father, thanks so much for coming to us and saving us with power. You're not wise. We're not strong, but you are. Thanks for taking us captive when we were in service to an evil master, coming and bringing us to yourself. You're so good. You're a good master to us. God, we want to be used by you. I pray you would give us boldness as people. We want to proclaim the message. I pray you give us some softball